Hi there, my name is Doreen Vanderstoop and I am an author and an oral storyteller and a musician. And I'm here today to talk about Watershed. And I'm going to start by reading a few sections of it. I'm going to start with chapter 1 and then skip to the end of chapter 1. The faint hiss of air brakes sounded above the wind. Willa Van Bruggen looked eastward and shielded her eyes against the May morning light. The sun lay low in the sky, a beautiful, terrible, celestial raspberry, colored by dust and by smoke drifting in from forest fires in northern Washington state and British Columbia. Crystal Canada's double water tanker hove into view at the top of the hill, the shine of its silver barrels dulled by the dusty air. Air brakes again, intermittent now, like sharp intakes of breath, as the rig inched down toward the Van Bruggen farm. Drivers had to keep their speed in check so water surges didn't send the vehicles careening out of control. Last night's conversation with her only son had been running through Willa's mind all morning. Daniel had video called her to share the news about getting an interview with Crystal Canada. "I'll be working," he said, "for the Federal Crown Corporation, keeping southern Alberta from turning into Death Valley." Daniel shook his head as if his point were obvious, and he didn't understand why she wasn't getting it. She wasn't. She wanted him back, needed him to help them keep the farm afloat. Daniel tried again. It's like a banker getting a job with the Bank of Canada or an art dealer with the National Gallery of Canada. Crystal operates for profit at arm's length from government, but the feds guarantee the cash flow in case of financial trouble. They won't let the water pipeline fail. As he spoke, Willa's mind drifted back to a time when she and young Daniel crept into the loft of the hay barn to check out a new litter of kittens. She'd marveled at how gently his little fingers stroked their silky fur. But he was strong-willed too, always arguing that he was ready to take on the next big farm job. Back then, she couldn't imagine he'd ever leave. He told her the job with Crystal would be a dream come true. "Smile," Willa commanded herself. Congratulate him. But the muscles around her mouth refused to budge. The phone screen relayed the hopeful twitch of his eyebrows. "Aren't you happy for me?" he asked. "I can finally start to tackle my debt." "Of course I'm happy," she said, the words like a mouthful of sand. Daniel ran a hand across the top of his head and let it nest in his thick hair, as yellow as ripe wheat. His blue eyes shone. "My master's is paying off," he said, "and I've made great contacts. No one is hiring, but my friend Percy Dickinson got me this interview. Brilliant guy, double majored in political science and hydrogeology. Now he's a big shot in the provincial water ministry." "I'm glad you can get on top of your debt," Willa said. Her tiny image in the corner of the screen looked glad, didn't it? "I just wish you were coming home." Daniel's face disappeared as he tilted the phone away. She saw the dingy ceiling tiles in his basement apartment. Then his face filled the screen again. "Listen to me, Mom. I'm a professional now. I don't want to fight dust and wind on a few lousy acres of dried-out farmland. I want to help everyone. I've been looking for a year. A lot of grads from the class of 2057 are still out of work. They'd kill for this opportunity. I can't make ends meet with half shifts of the breakfast barn." Neither spoke for a full, uncomfortable minute. "I'm staying in Calgary," Daniel said. So now we'll skip ahead towards the end of chapter 1. Only the tick-tock of the Dutch wall clock in the living room broke the silence in the house. Willa thought about the federal government's upcoming buyout program. Landowners in southern Alberta would have from July to December 2058 to cash in their land. 25% of its current assessed value, itself a fraction of land values a decade ago. She couldn't betray her father by selling his land for a pittance. Still, the word foreclosure reared in Willa's mind, bucking all other thoughts away. She tensed her stomach muscles to quell an eruption of sick dread. She anchored her hands on the edge of the table, fixated on her tea mug, with its picture of a bluebird resting in a twist of jade vines. Her headache, which had subsided, crept back in. She watched, One of the vines became a snake. It writhed and wound its body around the delicate bird, squeezing. Willa swiped the mug away. Tea sprayed her leg and the floor. The cup smashed on the tiles. Willa gaped at the dark spatters and ceramic shards. With trembling hands, she retrieved a broom from beside the fridge and swept up the mess. She put the broom back and leaned her back against the fridge, looking at the floor streaked with tea stains where she'd swept. "It's only an interview," she'd said to Daniel. "If you don't get the job, you should come home for a while. We can build another barn, buy more goats, up our milk output." "Mom," he said, "I gotta go." Willa had stared at the screen until call ended, stopped flashing. She decided to follow up with a text. "Sorry, Daniel. It feels like we're losing you." Then she stopped, backspaced the message away. As a toddler, Daniel had run around the barn yelling, "Cha-cha," his way of saying cat. Willa sighed at the memory of her boy who grew up and left. Her father had passed away. Her mother and sister had moved to Calgary. An image flitted through her mind. Her mother fingering the four-way medal on a chain around her neck. She never took it off. Trusted the fervent prayers and devotion it inspired to fix everything. But the cross hadn't fixed anything. This land had once belonged to Willa's industrious paternal grandparents, determined immigrants from the Netherlands. Her father had persevered to keep the Van Bruggen dream alive. Willa knew what she had to do. Unflinching devotion to the land and working as hard as her forebears had. That made sense. Drought and strange visions be damned. So that was a section from Willa's chapter, and the book alternates between Willa's point of view and her son Daniel. So we're going to move on to chapter 3 now, and I'll read a little bit of that. So this is Daniel's chapter. Daniel Brooks gripped the railing as he crossed the Langevin Bridge toward downtown Calgary. A hefty west wind kicked dust around the dry Bow River riverbed. He passed through the castellated wall that encircled Calgary's core. Built to resist floodwater from storms and melting glaciers, the wall now imprisoned the city's hollow-eyed skyscrapers. Surging oceans, ruinous storms, and crippling droughts had finally sent developed and developing countries into backflips to curb carbon. Oil barons had been chased out of Calgary's plush offices in the 2040s by the world's intolerance for unconventional oil and its untenable footprint of emissions and tar ponds. As Dan strode up McLeod Trail towards Stephen Avenue, he skirted an overturned sedan half on, half off the sidewalk near the municipal building. A single file of commuters bypassed the derelict car. Most wore dual cartridge dust masks, as he did. A line of ants weaving around an obstruction. Unfazed, single-minded, he found comfort in the pad and click of their shoes on the pavement, the sound of order and determination. Calgary had become a study in extremes, serene by day and frantically agitated at night. City police couldn't keep up with the chaos caused by rowdy hordes that came out after dark to hurl rocks and insults about uncaring governments. A 9 o'clock curfew had done nothing to quell the violence and destruction. Just that morning, Mayor Vaillancourt announced they couldn't afford to hire more police officers. He declared a state of emergency and said he had appealed to the federal government to deploy Canadian Forces personnel to patrol the downtown core. The mayor said City Council would make sure the light rail transit system kept running, as if the whir of electric arms stroking overhead wires and the hum of C-train wheels on shiny tracks signaled that Calgary was still a civilized place.
Thank you so much for doing that reading. I love your book, as you know. I've read it. And so I'm just going to ask you a few questions just so we're just going to get an idea of like where this book came from and stuff. The first one is, what inspired you and like where did you get your ideas for the book Watershed?
Well, it goes way back to when I was a child in Calgary. I was born in the Netherlands and we moved to Calgary in 1968. And even though I always lived in the city, even as a child, I remember being very concerned about the farmers. wondering whether they, and hoping that they would always have the right amount of moisture and the right amount of sunshine to grow their crops and raise their animals. I don't know where that came from, but that concern stayed with me. So as I got older and climate change came into the news cycle more and more frequently, I began to realize that the effects of climate change would make the job of farming and the legacy and the future of the family farm that much more difficult to maintain. And so that was basically the inception of Watershed. And the family was Dutch, as my family was. I wanted to celebrate my Dutch heritage, and so that was fun to do. And but that was the root of it.
Yeah. And so, of course, Watershed is a lot about climate change and how that affects little farms and like different people. So lots of research went into this. Do you just want to talk a little bit about the research you did in order to write this book?
Yeah, so I mean, the whole process, concept to completion, was about 10 years. I was busy with other things. I was doing contract writing work at the time, raising my family, so I didn't always have time to, steadily attack the book. But it definitely started with research. It was really important for me to get my head around what that kind of future might look like. I wanted it to be a near future scenario. And to explore what the climate change effects might be during that time period of, the mid-2000s. And so I read widely. And there were, lots of books I read, lots of authors. The main one would be Robert Sanford. He has written upwards of 30 books. He actually works with the UN University on water issues. So if there's drought issues in India and Africa, they call him. And he lives in Canmore, right near Calgary. So I read his books, and I ended up meeting him after the book came out, which was very exciting. But his books are very accessible. They're science-based, but they're very accessible and easy to read. And he had wonderful information on the Mountain West and what climate change might do to the Mountain West and the result of the melting of the glaciers and what that would do to the prairies. So that was really important reading for me to do. I also read other Alberta authors who I love. Fred Stenson, Kevin Van Tighem is a wonderful science writer, and other fiction writers too, Aretha Van Herk and Sid Marty. So lots and lots of reading, and eventually I had to say, okay, enough. I stop procrastinating. It's time to actually get down and write the book. So that's what I forced myself to do that at one point, and then I would delve back in when I needed to clarify a point of science, but then I was off and running with it.
That's great. I love that. And of course, yes, your book is a lot about science and climate change. But what I think is at the heart of it is that the family situation that goes on and how they're affected by it and everything. And so your book deals with a lot of very serious themes. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what was hardest for you to write some of those more personal family scenes.
Yeah, it's the family dynamics that really always get you right there. It's and that's at the heart of so much of what we struggle with in life. We rely on our family to help us, through our struggles, and then when our ambitions are at odds, as they are between Willa and Daniel, that makes life more difficult. It makes the relationship more difficult, and that's what the book explores, is this relationship between Willa and Daniel. So what was difficult, the really tough scenes between the characters. So there's one scene, without giving too much away, between Daniel's grandfather and him, and Daniel's grandfather struggling with a health issue, and that was very, very hard to write because it was very difficult for Daniel to see his grandfather go through that. So that kind of family dynamic was difficult to write. I guess the other section that I worked very hard on was Willa's climax in the book, basically where she sort of has her revelation. And I wanted to make sure that I really got that right, that I drilled down into what was motivating her and the result of that experience for her, what that was like. So that was just really, really important, and that's why I felt it was, more of a challenge, because I really wanted to get that right. Mm-hmm. So it's the dynamics, also the dynamics with ourselves, the struggles that we have with ourselves. She was trying to overcome something and figure things out, and that was really difficult for her. So those are the challenging parts of life and
Yeah.
writing.
Yeah, and writing. Yeah, it would have. I lost my food. So obviously your book has a lot of themes: the climate change, the family, and everything. If there is one thing that you hope your readers could take away from your book, what would it be? Tricky question, I know.
Yeah, no, there's, I mean, stories are so wonderful for instilling things in us and for challenging us. And I mean, every culture, every civilization on earth has a storytelling tradition. I'm also an oral storyteller, and so that's really, really important. And I love connecting with my audience during an oral storytelling session, because you can see that reaction. And they could talk to you about it afterwards, which is a little more difficult with a book. You get reactions from your readers, but you know, I hope people can connect with the characters for sure. I hope that I really appreciate it when a book can challenge my values and my priorities, and just my very ideas about life and the world. And if that's the effect it has, if I can challenge my readers to think about how they feel about some of the issues that come up in the book, whether it's family dynamics or whether it's climate change, you know, that would be fantastic. One of the readers I did get some feedback from, which of course every author loves, was a reader in Ottawa, and she said after reading the book, that she completely had altered her view of her tap water and the canal outside her window. She said she looked at it completely differently and had saw it with so much more value. And that's the best kind of review I could possibly get.
Yeah, being able to change people's lives. I get that. I do. So in order to change people's lives, where could people go to find your book? Where would be the best place for you to?
Yeah, well, they can go to my website. I have a whole list of places that they can get the book. So it's doreenvanderstoop.ca, www.doreenvanderstoop.ca. And but you know, I would highly recommend going to your local bookstore, your independent bookstore, and you can order it from them, or if they have it in stock, all the better. But yeah, they always need our support, so that's a great place to go. And of course, from your local library.
Yes. Thank you so much. We're so glad you were able to come out and talk about your book, and I hope more people read it.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. It was just a joy to be with you today.